Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this little guy, the Kizer Kim Ning Uprising. First though, I got a little disclaimer for you. This knife was actually sent to me from Kizer directly. They reached out to me. I mentioned as usual that if I'm doing a review, I'm going to talk about the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly, and I might well call it junk, and to their credit, they said, okay, sure, we want an honest review. Take some stones. And so they sent this guy to me. That just means two things. It means I need to be careful, and I have been careful, to make sure that I'm not letting that influence my review too much. And we also have to assume that this is the very best quality-controlled Kizer Uprising ever, that they're not going to send me something that's not their best of the best. So the one you get out of the box might be a little different than that. But anyways, I want to thank Kizer for sending this along, and with now duly disclaimed. The designer on this guy is Kim Ning, who is not somebody I'm familiar with in the past. Did one other knife for Kizer, the Shoal, which I haven't had a chance to check out, but anyways, so there's that. Let's do a little size comparison for you on this little guy. It's actually not all that little. Here is the Ontario Rat number 2 and the Ontario Rat number 1 when I find it on my table here. There we go. So we can see that blade length-wise, we're right in a very similar sort of department, although the Uprising's a little bit longer there. Let's look at the Spyderco Delica for tradition's sake, and on the longer, higher end, here is your ZTO 452CF. This guy is obviously a little bit longer than your Kim Ning Uprising here. Then finally, kind of a weird little thing, I actually have no clue on the pricing or availability of this knife. I can't find it available anywhere, which makes me suspect that they sent me a production prototype. And so that's kind of neat and interesting and different. You saw it here first. But check the description. As soon as I know more about, how much this is going to cost and whatnot, I'll put that in there. But so I'm going on a little bit of incomplete information at the moment. So there you go. Let's go ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly, though, of this particular pocket knife. Okay, so on the good side, the construction on this guy is really pretty excellent. You've got good materials. You're looking at solid chunks of titanium and S35 VN blade steel, which is a great steel, and Kizer runs it well generally. The construction is pretty straightforward. It's just two chunks of S35 VN with a lock bar insert and whatnot. Nothing really complex to it, and as a result, it's very easy to take down. It's got a fixed pivot, it's not free spinning, and it's got torques in the middle here and torques here and here. I mean, you watch this assembly video, there's not a whole lot really to that process, which is nice. It makes this knife, although it looks fairly complicated, pretty straightforward to take down, which is pretty good, actually, I'll say. Next thing that I like very much is the canted clip here. This is a more straightforward spring clip. It's got lots of tension, but more importantly, it holds the knife in such a way that when you've got this in your pocket, the knife tucks sort of back in that direction, which is good. It means as you're reaching into your pocket, your hand can kind of slide by, and then there's plenty of room left over here for whatever you're keeping in your pocket. So that's kind of nice. I am a fan of the cant on the clip, although the clip has some issues itself. So that's good. The balance on this guy is relatively nice. It feels like it's in a good position in your hand, even though it's relatively large. It's nicely done in that way. I am a fan of the hollow flipper tab, although I'll be honest, I don't know why. There's no real reason for that to be the case, but it is an extra little step, and it adds a little something to the knife, a little bit of complexity. I don't know. It's a detail, but anyways, I like it. Speaking of details I like, the stonewashing on this is actually quite nice on the titanium. In a lot of ways, it reminds me of your Spyderco Sleesh Bowie, although it's not quite as polished as your Sleesh Bowie is. It's still got that nice little stonewash to it, and I think it's a nice contrast with some of Kizer's more kind of soft blasting finishes that they tend to do. This is a little bit more interesting to me than this sort of a finish, and so I appreciate that very much. And then finally, what would probably be the grade on most other knives is the action on this guy. This is a stellar action. It's not a free dropper necessarily, but it is still got a very nice detent, and it is very smooth. I suspect if I ran this guy a lot more, it would get to the point where it's free dropping, and especially if I adjust the lock bar tension a little bit. But, I mean, this is a very, very nice action on this knife. It deploys very reliably 100% of the time. No real questions there. So that's what's good here. The action is great. There are some nice details like the hollow clip here. I'm sorry, hollow flipper tab and the stonewash going on here. The clip on it is actually fairly nice with that cant in the pocket there, and the construction on it is very nice. It's solid, it's simple, it's easy to take down, and it's got good steel and materials on the whole. So there you go. That's what's good about this guy. Let's talk about what's great here. For me, what's really great about this knife is actually the design on this, and I mean that more aesthetically than anything else. Kizer has a tendency, they kind of have a type. It's not fair because they do a lot of different things, but generally the knives that Kizer produces tend to be more along these lines. They're knives that are relatively round, relatively smooth, like they're very organic sorts of shapes. And so that's well and good, and they tend to be nice in the hand and whatnot, but it means that a lot of your Kizers look very, very similar. The Velox versus the Gemini versus the Yosemite versus... They all seem to be fairly similar. This guy is very different than a lot of what Kizer's putting out. This is entirely not that. Whereas most of them are rounded and very organic, this is very sharp and geometric and linear. It's got all kinds of different kind of approaches. You've got this contour up here and this contour down here. Then you've got this guy, and these two lines kind of match each other and parallel a little bit. I don't know why I like this design. Like, it's not something that's like, oh my God, Nick, this is me. But at the same time, it's kind of cool looking. It's neat. And the blade shape, to me particularly, is just neat, with this really aggressive drop on the point here, coupled with the recurve. I don't tend to love recurves, but nonetheless, I think it works here. And relative to a lot of the other Kizers, which are just kind of pretty, but curved, round, just titanium slabs, this guy really makes a stronger statement. It's a little bit more bold, a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more different. Kim Ning, this designer, has done a good job in making a knife that really stands out from the norm that Kizer generally produces. And so for me at least, I love the looks of this. It's not my particular taste, but I do love seeing something that's relatively new and different out of Kizer, particularly when it is well put together and constructed. That's really nice. So that's your great, is this design looks pretty spectacular, and it's way out of the norm of what Kizer's been doing lately. Let's talk about some of the bad. Okay, so on the bad side, first I gotta point out, Kizer is a Chinese company, and this knife is made in China. For some people, that's actually a big problem. It's a political issue for them. For me, I don't really care. As long as they're making really good quality stuff, and this is a good quality knife, it doesn't matter to me. But I have to point that out for the people who do actually, give a damn about that. Next thing that is a little bit more functionally problematic with the knife is the fact that it's got a pretty spectacular pocket pecker here. This little flipper tab is going to be pecking on whatever's in your pocket all day long, and especially given that it's kind of sharpened off a little bit here, that makes it a little bit more flagrant, if you will, than usual. It's not the end of the world, but it is something you got to keep in mind. Next issue for me, but it's not going to be an issue for everybody, is the recurve. I don't tend to like recurves on knives. They look pretty, and at least here it's in service of a pretty bold design, but they complicate sharpening. If you're using a flat stone, like on an Edge Pro, a bench stone, a KME, you're going to have trouble because you can't run a flat stone over an interior concave surface. Pardon me. If you're using something like a Shopmaker or a flexible strop or something, you'll be okay. But still, I'm not a big fan of recurves, but that's bad and not ugly because some people really are. Then finally, on the negative side, I just don't know what the price of this knife is going to be. That's tough to say, because this knife could be a really great value if they priced it like $160, $180. It could be okay if it's someplace in the $230, $50 range, and it could be completely out of line at like $300. I really don't know what they're going to come in on price-wise, and that's going to make a big difference in my evaluation of the knife. I'll be honest, I don't entirely love doing a public review of a knife that's not available for yet. But that's life. Like I said, I'll let you know in the description if I hear the price between the time this is filmed and the time that goes live, and I'll give a couple of thoughts there. But the price is really going to make a big difference on this knife. I'm hoping it comes in the $180-200 range, so it's still a pretty decent value. But if it's way north of that, you're going to have to start asking some questions. So that's what's bad about this. I don't know the price, and I don't love that. It's got the recurve, it's got a pocket pecker flipper tab, and for some people, it's bad that it's made in China. But again, I don't really care. Let's talk ugly. Okay, so on the ugly side, first off, unfortunately, Kizer's warranty is not really all that stellar, in that it is unconditionally voided if you take the knife apart. This makes sense. They used to use fairly soft screws. I haven't had trouble lately. Maybe they still are, and I've just gotten lucky, but nonetheless, the fact that this is a knife that's running on bearings, you will need to take this apart to maintain it sooner or later, and yet doing so voids the warranty. That's ugly, and especially as they're moving towards the higher end, they're going to need to fix that warranty. So anyways, that's the first ugly issue. Second issue for me, and perhaps the uglier thing here, is actually the ergonomics. This knife has some very serious ergonomic flaws. The biggest one of them is this little right here, because this surface, I hope you can see, is actually very sharp. It's got a very sharp little corner here, and then there's not much in the way of chamfering along this surface here. And so as you're holding this knife, your index finger is right up against this little thing, and it digs right in. It leaves, this corner is way, way, way too sharp. Every time I see these little cutouts for the lock bar from the scale itself, I see that surface pop up, and it's never a good thing. So I really hope that they're able to round this off, or even just eliminate this piece of metal entirely through some design change to make that better, or even just to incorporate this surface right here into the extent of the lock bar, so there's just a flat surface going this direction. I get why they kind of do it that way often, but it's no good. And so that's a bad ergonomic issue right there. And if I keep this guy, I'm going to be rounding this guy off absolutely 100%. Other ergonomic issue is actually the pocket clip ramp here. It's great in that it's very easy to get into your pants, but unfortunately, it really does tend to dig into your hand as you're gripping this knife. That makes for a very big hot spot. This knife can be gripped comfortably. Kind of the upshot is it can be gripped comfortably, but you need to have your index finger up here instead of back here. And the majority of times when I grab it, I end up with some hot spot or another, whether it's off of this guy, whether it's off of the clip, whether it's off... And that's just not great. It almost, ergonomics are very personal. Maybe the designer had a differently shaped hand, and so it felt okay there. But this is really rough. I hope that they can do some minor fixes to the ergonomics here to make this a much more compelling sort of knife. Because right now, as this knife stands, it's as bad for the hand as it is good for the eye, and that's just no good. So that's the ugly, is that the warranty from Kizer doesn't allow disassembly, and that's no good. And the ergonomics on this knife, it's got some pretty serious issues that hopefully can be fixed. So there you go. Let's talk final conclusions. So, look, this is a knife that I feel strongly about in two directions. At some level, I really like this a lot. They've made a very pretty design. Functionally, it works fine, as a cutting tool. It's got really nice construction. It's got good materials, S35VN. It's got this really nice stonewash that I hope I see more of out of Kizer in the future, or frankly out of anybody else. And it is well made. I mean, I can't really object to this in terms of build quality or otherwise. But at the same time, it's also really, really awful in my hand, ergonomically speaking. It's got those big ergonomic flaws. It's got this little issue right here. It's got this issue right here where this is sticking up further. And then this clip needs to be swapped out for something, or at least re-rounded in such a way that you're not going to have those serious hotspot sorts of issues. It's possible that somebody else with differently shaped hands would have an easier time like this, but honestly, this design, especially this little portion right here, feels like it was rushed out the door and they kind of missed that final step of, well, how can we make this a little nicer in the hand? And so the end result is that this is a very nice design, and it's well done, but it's got a fundamental flaw. And so if they don't make any of those tweaks, I'm not sure I recommend that you buy this guy unless you can hold it in your hand first. If this works great in your hand, then it's a solid knife. I mean, there's a lot of good here. But I'm really hoping that before this is finally released, that they spend a little bit more time on the ergonomics. They knock this down, they knock this down, they knock this down, and turn this into a design that's going to be a whole lot better for the hand, and ideally feels as good as it looks. So there you go. That's the Kizer Kim Ning Uprising. It's a great knife in a lot of ways, but it's a terrible knife in one really important way, and I hope they can fix that, or at the very least, that you have a better experience with your hands. So there you go. Thanks, Kizer, very much for sending this guy along. I hope you all found this interesting, and that you have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.